Good evening, dear students. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 26th December 2024, and in today's session we have some important articles along with one mains practice question. So we'll try to discuss the mains practice question along with those articles as well, right? So today we have one very important mains practice question, and that is with respect to the interlinking of rivers. So we all knew that the interlinking of rivers is in news in recent times, and it is also a very important topic for the general studies paper 3, and even it may be asked in your general studies paper 1 as well, right? So recently Prime Minister Narendra Modi laid a foundation stone for the Ken Betwa interlinking of rivers, and that will benefit the drought prone Bundelkhand region. Now in this context, the question is, examine the potential of river interlinking in India to ensure a greater equity in the water distribution by enhancing the availability of water in drought prone and rain fed area, right? So this question is primarily about the interlinking of rivers, right? So we all knew that the concept of interlinking of rivers would address the problem of drought in different parts of India. And even if you look at Indian agriculture, most of Indian agriculture is rain fed in nature. And even Indian monsoon, when we talk about Indian monsoon, so most of the Indian monsoon would result in rains in the northern and eastern parts of India compared to the less rainfall in the southern and the western parts of India. And in this context, so there is a high intensity of drought in different parts of India throughout throughout the year. And apart from that, there are also constant and regular interstate river water disputes as well. Now in this context, we'll understand what is the interlinking, the concept of interlinking of rivers, what are the benefits of interlinking of rivers. However, what are the potential challenges or the disadvantages of interlinking rivers. And apart from that, we'll also understand the way forward, how we can actually proceed with respect to the interlinking of rivers, right? So this question is very important. Now generally when we talk about the interlinking of rivers, so it is linking of two different rivers, so one river with then another river, right? So water surplus basin to the water deficit basin. So that's how the surplus water can be transferred to the deficit basin. So that's how the water or more land can be brought under irrigation, and in fact that would also supports agriculture well and improves productivity as well. Now in the introduction, you need to briefly describe what is interlinking of rivers. So the interlinking of rivers project essentially aims at linking India's rivers by a network of reservoirs and canals, right? So this essentially involves linking Indian rivers by a network of reservoirs and canals, and in fact that will allow the water capacity to be shared and distributed across the country. And that's how the water problems or the challenges which are being created by the scarcity of the water can be addressed. Now in India, we could see that there are regions where there is a high level of flood, and in fact there are other regions also which are comparatively experiencing drought like conditions. Now in this context, it is very important that we need to link the rivers with the surplus rivers with the deficit river basins. And in fact some experts are also suggesting that it will reduce the persistent floods in some parts of the country, and it will also address the shortages in other parts as well, right? And in fact interlinking of rivers will also facilitate generation of hydroelectricity, and hydroelectricity is very important to ensure India's energy security as well. So therefore interlinking of rivers is having multiple benefits or number of other advantages as well. Now in this context, we need to understand the potential of interlinking of rivers in India, or the potential of interlinking projects. So we need to understand the potential. And in fact when we talk about the Indian monsoon, so we have two different types of monsoon, the southwest monsoon and northeast monsoon. And it is also in fact in just 2 to 3 months the southwest monsoon would result in around 70% of the rainfall over the Indian subcontinent. However, most of the rainfall can be experienced in the north and eastern parts of India. So however, the southern part and the western parts are comparatively experiencing a less amount of rainfall during the Indian monsoon, and because of that particular region, this region has been experiencing severe drought like conditions, and the drought like conditions are also resulting in water scarcity, as well as the agriculture is also getting impacted because of drought like conditions in these respective areas, right? So in this context, it is very important that when we link water, the perennial rivers, with these seasonal rivers in the peninsular plateau, that will ensure the surplus water from the perennial rivers would be transferred into the this subcontinent. So that's how can be transferred into this peninsular part of India, and that's how this region can actually overcome the adverse impact of drought and other serious water stress or water scarcity conditions. And apart from that, in fact, this will also reduce farmers' dependence on monsoon. Now, in fact, in India, farmers are excessively dependent on monsoon because of poor irrigation infrastructure. Now, when we link rivers, surplus rivers with deficit rivers, so that will ensure that the farmers will no longer depend on monsoon, or their excessive dependence on monsoon can be substantially declined. And apart from that, millions of hectares of land can also be brought under the cultivation as well, and that would substantially increases productivity, and increased productivity would also result in the food security of our country as well. Now, as of now, because of the climate change, food security is one of the major problems that India will face in future because of a huge number of population and the climate change's impact on the agriculture and agricultural production. So therefore, ensuring food security should be the top priority, and interlinking of rivers will also help ensuring food security of country's population as well. And it also substantially increases crop productivity as well, because now crops are getting adequate water. So therefore, that would also result in adequate income security, livelihood security for the farmers, improving the living standards of the farmers, and it also increases the revenues for the state as well. So as of now, if you look at the total contribution of agriculture sector in GDP, it is between 15 to 17%, and it is also very important that more number of people, around 45% of India's population, have been directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture sector, but its GDP contribution is still very less. So therefore, in this context, it is very important that we need to increase the GDP contribution from the agriculture sector, and interlinking of rivers would actually have the potential of substantially increasing agriculture GDP as well. And in fact, the interlinking of rivers, right? So linking of the perennial rivers with the seasonal rivers in the peninsular part of India, so will further ease water shortages in western and the southern part of India, thereby mitigating the recurrent floods that are being experienced in eastern part of India. And apart from that, when we link these rivers, so interlinking of rivers would also result in the generation of sustainable high hydro energy as well. So therefore, India requires clean energy, and we also have the Panchamrit commitments. Now, in this backdrop, so in order to generate more and more hydroelectricity at a sustainable scale, so interlinking of rivers would certainly help India. So therefore, we need to leverage this, and we need to produce more and more hydro energy as well. And in fact, it will also have the socio-economic benefits as well, right? So it will have a multiplier effect when we interlink rivers, so that will have a multiplier effect, and that will also alleviate the rural poverty as well. So therefore, poverty is one of the main problem in India, particularly in rural India, particularly among the people who are directly or indirectly dependent on the agriculture sector. There are higher levels of poverty. So in order to deal with the poverty, in order to alleviate alleviate the poverty, it is very important that we need to address the issues which are prevalent in agriculture sector. And one of the main issue in the agriculture sector is lack of access to the irrigation, right? So not all land parcels are brought under the irrigation because lack of irrigation infrastructure. So interlinking of rivers would ensure that more and more land would be brought under irrigation, and that would also substantially increase farmers' incomes, and that will help reduce the poverty levels as well. Now farmers can actually invest in education of their children, also healthcare, thereby the living standards could also substantially improve. So therefore it will also have the socio-economic benefits as well. A need for interlinking of rivers will further prevent the interstate water disputes. So there are a lot of interstate water disputes in India. For example, interstate water dispute between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu government, and interstate river water dispute between Andhra Pradesh and Odisha, interstate river water dispute between Haryana and Punjab. So throughout India there are interstate water disputes between different states. However, when we link the rivers, so it is expected that these issues can be settled in a peaceful manner. And apart from that, there are potential benefits to the transportation, particularly the inland navigation, right? So in fact, inland navigation is known as a costly and cheaper alternative, and logistics costs can also be substantially reduced by promoting inland navigation. Now when we interlink rivers throughout India, so that will also provide opportunities, or that is actually having a lot of potential of inland navigation. So thereby it also becomes an alternative source of livelihood and also a source of income for the masses as well. However, interlinking of rivers is not free from the challenges. There are a lot of challenges, and we need to address those potential challenges as well. So when we plan to link the rivers, now what are those challenges? Now one thing that we need to take into account when we are talking about the interlinking of rivers is the potential cost that is being involved. So it is very expensive. Interlinking of rivers is not easy. It is very expensive. Now when we are spending a huge amount of money on the interlinking of rivers, so we need to consider whether the cost and benefit through the interlinking of rivers is either equal, is more, whether the cost is more compared to the benefit. So we need to take into account all these aspects. And apart from that, we also have the administrative delay, one of the main problem. Now due to administrative delay, generally what happens, so the projects are generally not completed on time, and that will further substantially increases the cost of the project as well. Thereby it actually costs the exchequer of the government a lot of money, right? Particularly the taxpayers money. So therefore interlinking of river is very expensive, because you see, we need to acquire land as well. We need the acquisition of land would result in the compensation issues, rehabilitation of people, and resettlement of the people, so evacuation of the people. So all these things actually involved, and it is a very complex issue. And in fact, so all these aspects would result in increasing the cost on the government exchequer. So that is one major aspect. Now the other thing that we need to talk about when we talk about the interlinking of rivers is that it's a huge impact on the environment, right? So it impact the land. So land would be submerged, forests would be submerged, and that would impact the biodiversity of the area, and even that also impacts the livelihoods of the millions of people. And it would also result in the rehabilitation issues, resettlement issues. And apart from rehabilitation and resettlement, so displacement of people as well, right? So we need to displace people from those respective areas. And it also involves environmental impact assessment. Generally, environmental impact assessment is not done in letter and spirit, and that is also another major challenge with respect to the interlinking of rivers. And in fact, one example of interlinking of rivers and its impact on forests, land and biodiversity is that 200 square kilometers of Panna Tiger Reserve is going to be submerged because of the Ken Betwa interlinking of river project. And in fact, a lot of environmentalists also raised concern about the implementation of this Ken Betwa interlinking project, because it is going to submerge around 200 square kilometers of Panna Tiger Reserve. And throughout the world there are some instances as well. For example, less than positive experiences that have occurred in different parts of the countries. Like for example, there's a diversion of Amudarya and Sirdarya rivers, and even Australia's experiments in its Murray-Darling basin. So all these have been pointing out towards a worst impact of river linking, because river linking on environment, forests, biodiversity. So that aspect has to be taken into account, and environmental impact assessment has to be done in letter and spirit as well. And in fact, last but not the least, so it will also result in massive displacement of people from their original habitat. So that is one of the main problem of left-wing extremism as well, right? So people are being displaced, and they're being alienated from their land rights, they're being exploited, there's no proper rehabilitation and resettlement of the people, right? And in fact, it also costs government a lot to display to rehabilitate, to resettle the displaced people as well. So therefore there's a huge burden on the government to deal with the issue of rehabilitation of the displaced people. Now, what should be the way forward in this context? So it is also important that you need to provide a proper way forward as well, because you have mentioned some challenges with the interlinkage of rivers. Now, when we talk about the way forward, there's a need to build responsibility, capability, and accountability, right? So these are a very important aspects when we are planning to go ahead with the interlinking of rivers, and particularly with respect to the water management. And we should also focus on reviving and rejuvenating our river ecosystems. As of now, they are being degraded, they're being exploited, and they're being polluted as well. And apart from that, we should also focus on judicious use of the canal water, growing crops that are appropriate to region. Particularly, we should move away from the water guzzling crops. There are certain water guzzling crops, right? So we should move away from those crops. And there is also a need to encourage drip irrigation, sprinkler irrigation. They are part of micro irrigation. Now, with micro irrigation, generally what happens, right? So there will be no intensive irrigation or extensive or intensive usage of water. So with micro irrigation, we use water very wisely, right? So that is also very important. And we should also revive the traditional systems such as tanks as well. So that could essentially ensure that the existing scarce water resources are used in a much more efficient and effective manner. And it is also very important to invest in water conservation, and more efficient irrigation and a better farm practices are the way forward as of now. And we should also go forward with interlinking of most feasible rivers, and that is one way forward. Instead of going all across the country at a one single point of time, it is important that we need to identify the feasible interlinkage projects, and the government should go ahead with the interlinking of those rivers in consultation with the respective state governments. And that would be a one way of going ahead with the interlinkage of rivers. So apart from that, there's one topic as well, Ken Betwa link project. So we'll try to understand some nuances of the Ken Betwa link project as well, and what is its importance, and what are the areas that are getting benefited from the Ken Betwa link project. So all those things we'll try to understand from this particular topic. Now, earlier in general, we have understood that what are the benefits and potential challenges of interlinking of rivers in India, because it is a concept which is very popular in India, because of water scarcity, and the needs have been increasing day by day because of a huge number of population, right? So now we'll understand the Ken Betwa link project. So the context is that recently Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Wednesday laid the foundation stone for the Ken Betwa river linking project. So he laid the foundation stone for the Ken Betwa river linking project in Madhya Pradesh, Khajuraho. And in fact, the Ken Betwa river linking project aimed at solving the water woes of the Bundelkhand region. So you can see somewhere like this. This is the Bundelkhand region, and Ken Betwa river linking project would solve the water problems of the Bundelkhand region, and that spreads across parts of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. And in fact, it is estimated that the total project cost would be around 45,000 crore, right? So this is the total estimated cost of Ken Betwa link project. So however, if the central and state governments have cooperated and they have constructed this project on time, the project cost would be plus or minus 5,000 crore same. So however, if they delayed, if the project execution delayed, so then this estimated cost would further increase manifold, right? So in this context, we'll try to understand the Ken Betwa link project. So when we talk about the Ken Betwa link project, now in fact it is a project so through which transfer of surplus water from the Ken river, which is in Madhya Pradesh, to Betwa river in Uttar Pradesh, right? So essentially it would irrigate the drought prone Bundelkhand region, right? So this is the Ken Betwa river interlinking project, right? So through this project, the water surplus surplus water from the Ken river, which is in Madhya Pradesh, would be linked to the water deficit Betwa river in Madhya Pradesh, and that will actually benefit the Bundelkhand region, right? So you can see here, so this is how the river is being interlinked, right? So this is how the river is being interlinked, and this is the Ken river and this is the Betwa river, and here the surplus water from this Ken river, okay, so surplus water from the Ken river would be transferred to the water deficit Betwa river to irrigate the Bundelkhand region. Okay, so it will be used to irrigate the Bundelkhand region, which is very often known as the drought prone area. And this project also involves building around 77 meter tall, right? So 77 meter tall and also 2 kilometer wide Dodan dam, right? So a Dodan dam will also be built as part of the interlinking of Ken Betwa rivers, and it will be built within the Panna Tiger Reserve. Now you can see here, this is the Panna Tiger Reserve. So it is built across the Panna Tiger Reserve, and Ken Betwa is one of the 30 river interlinking projects conceived across the country, right? So apart from Ken Betwa, there are other interlinking projects also. For example, Mahanadi Godavari interlinking project and Godavari Krishna interlinking project. So there are several such interlinking projects, and this is one such project. Now what is the significance of the Ken Betwa link project? We need to understand the significance as well. So it will not only accelerate the water conservation, right? So we will conserve the water from the surplus water basin of Ken river, right? So it accelerates the water conservation by construction of a multi-purpose dam, right? So through construction of this particular dam, so we will conserve a lot of water, and it will also result in the generation of around 103 megawatt hydropower, right? So we could produce around 103 megawatt hydropower as well through this particular reservoir, and it will also supply drinking water to around 62 lakh people in the region. So 62 lakh people will also getting benefited from this Ken Betwa interlink project. And in fact, here Prime Minister Narendra Modi also mentioned about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and his immense contribution when it comes to the conservation of existing water resources in India, right? So it is a well-known fact that the Central Water Commission exists today because of the vision and efforts of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Please remember this, because this is very, very important in UPSC prelims also. This question has been asked previously. The Central Water Commission exists today in India. It is because of the vision and efforts of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And in fact, like Central Water Commission, major river valley projects in India were actually based on the vision of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. So he had he had done exceptional contribution for India's water resources, conservation of water resources, sustainable use of water resources, so all those things. And in fact, Ken Betwa project would bring prosperity to the drought prone Bundelkhand region. Now, apart from that, you could also go through some additional details with respect to the Ken Betwa interlink project. However, we have discussed most of the aspects with respect to the Ken Betwa interlinking project, river interlinking project. And the next topic is, recently the central government, particularly Ministry of Home Affairs, issued a new rules for the free movement regime between India and Myanmar. So between India and Myanmar, there was actually a free movement regime that the Indian government and Myanmar government have been implementing since 2018 as part of their agreement. Right now, what is this free movement regime? Now, free movement regime, so we have been sharing a long border, for example 1643 kilometers long border with Myanmar. And in fact, in India, number of states such as Mizoram, Manipur, Nagaland and Arunachal Pradesh have been sharing borders with Myanmar. And in fact, people in both Indian side and Myanmar side so have the cultural links, ethnic links as well, right? Because this division that has been made by the British, so that is irrational, unscientific. They did not take into account the familial relations, the ethnic relations and the cultural relations of the people when they are separating Burma from India. And because of that reason, so still people from both sides of India and Myanmar still have such relations, such strong relations. And because of that reason, Indian government has allowed the free movement regime. So free movement regime in the sense that, so without having a document, they can come and go into the India and Myanmar, right? So in fact, this is up to 16 kilometer on either side of the India-Myanmar border. But the thing is that recently what happened in Myanmar, there is a military coup. So because of military coup and also the problem of Rohingya refugees who are coming into the volatile northeastern part of India, and that has been creating a lot of tensions in states like Manipur. And because of that reason, the central government has decided to end this free movement regime with Myanmar, and there will be a strict regulations and protocols which are in place to allow entry of Myanmar people into India and Indians into Myanmar. Now in this context, we'll understand what are those new rules that the Union Home Ministry has introduced with respect to the movement of people on either side of India and Myanmar, right? So in fact, what is a free movement regime? So as I have already explained to you what is free movement regime. So a free movement regime allowed people from both sides of India and Myanmar to travel approximately 16 kilometers into each other's territory without a visa. So they don't generally require a visa, right? So without a visa, they can travel into India, and Indians can also travel into Myanmar as well within 16 kilometers, but with a border pass valid for 1 year, and that allowed a stay of up to 2 weeks. So they must have a border pass, right? So a valid border pass, and that border pass should be valid for 1 year, and the stay would be generally allowed for 2 weeks, right? So as I have already told you that India and Myanmar have been sharing 1643 kilometers of long border, and in fact This free movement regime has been allowed by the government of India as its approach towards its Act East policy. What is Act East policy? Earlier it was known as Look East policy, but Narendra Modi government has changed Look East policy into Act East policy. So under Act East policy, we will have a strong relations with Southeast Asia and East Asian countries in commerce, culture, science, technology, education, people to people ties. So it will focus on all these different areas, right? So it was the free movement regime was introduced in the year 2018 as part of government's Act East policy to boost the region's economy by encouraging trade with Southeast Asian nations, particularly northeastern part of India. The connectivity in northeast is very, very important. So in order to further strengthen connectivity, there are a number of initiatives that the government of India along with other regional partners are planning to launch. For example, India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway. Right, so that is also a connectivity project that links India's northeastern part with Myanmar and also Thailand. Okay, so there are a lot of security concerns in the sense that illegal immigrants, right? So illegal immigration is the main problem, right? So in order to arrest the illegal immigration and also particularly Rohingya refugees coming to the Indian side, so all these are the main concerns that India has been facing, and because of that reason the Home Ministry has decided to end this free movement regime. We have understood the context. So the context is that the Ministry of Home Affairs decided to end the free movement regime. However, recently the Ministry of Home Affairs has issued a new rules and regulations to permit the movement across India-Myanmar border. So we'll try to understand that aspect, right? So as we have already discussed about the free movement regime, so this free movement regime, under this all hill tribes who are living on the Indian side, right? So whether they are citizens of India or Myanmar, right? So whether they are citizens of India or Myanmar, they can travel within 16 kilometers on either side of the Indo-Myanmar border. So up to 16 kilometers they can travel on either side of the India-Myanmar border. So that is what is a free movement regime, right? So apart from that, in fact, they can also cross the border producing a border pass. So when people from Myanmar wanted to cross into India, so they have to produce a border pass, and the validity of the border pass is 1 year. And once they produce this border pass, so people from Myanmar, they can actually stay in India for up to 2 weeks, right? So they can stay in India up to two weeks earlier when there was a free movement regime, but now it is not the case because the Ministry of Home Affairs has decided to end the free movement regime. Okay, so in fact the free movement regime was implemented in 2018 as part of central government's Act East policy. As part of central government's Act East policy, this free movement regime has been implemented since 2018. And in fact, the free movement regime actually helps the locals who are living on either side of India-Myanmar border to get more culturally assimilated with trans-border villages through weddings, celebrating common festivals together, and also the trans-border trade as well through the border hearts. Now, as I have already told you that during the colonial rule, Myanmar was arbitrarily separated from India, so it was called as Burma. So it was an unscientific division of Burma from India, and that has resulted in, people are very close. They're being end up in two different countries, and that's where they started facing problems. And in order to solve those problems, the government has started the free movement regime. And in fact, it is also a reflection of the physical, ethnic, linguistic and cultural fraternal linkages among the trans-border villages across both sides of both India and Myanmar. And in fact, the free movement regime had been scrapped to ensure internal security of the country and also maintain the demographic structure of the northeastern part of India, because northeastern region is considered as a very volatile region, So there are ethnic tensions, but when illegally immigrants entering into the northeastern part of India, that has been leading to the tensions in the northeastern part of India, particularly in Manipur, and it is also having the national security concerns, and because of that reason the government has decided to end this free movement regime. Now there are some familial and ethnic ties, and because of that particular reason the government has actually been allowing the free movement regime, right? So earlier the territorial limit of free movement then was 40 kilometer, and that was further reduced to just 16 kilometers in the year 2004, and additional regulations were further introduced in the year 2006. However, earlier it was up to 40 kilometers, so people from 40 kilometers on the either side of India and Myanmar border. And in fact, according to the new guidelines which are being issued by the Ministry of Home Affairs, a resident who is planning to cross over to India or India to Myanmar will be given a border pass, right? So anyone who is coming to India from Myanmar or going to Myanmar from India, so they will be given a border pass, right? So other thing that you need to understand, the Indo-Myanmar border is guarded by Assam Rifles, right? So Assam Rifles guards the Indo-Myanmar border, so they will be given a border pass by the Assam Rifles for a stay up to 7 days. Now they can stay up to 7 days. Earlier it was 2 weeks, but now they can stay up to 7 days in the neighboring country. And in fact, Assam Rifles is the primary border guarding force along 1643 kilometer border with Myanmar, right? So how this new rules would be applicable for the people who are decided to come to India, who are decided to go to Myanmar, right? So for entry into India from Myanmar, individuals will have to report at the designated border crossing points, and they have to fill a form. So there are certain border crossings, right? So they have to go to these border crossings and they need to fill a form in these border crossings. And as I've already told you that Assam Rifles, right? So Assam Rifles usually guard the borders between India and Myanmar. So Assam Rifles will conduct a detailed document verification of the people who wanted to go either side. So which is being followed, which is after having the document inspection or a document verification. So next, security and health checkup will also be done by state police and health department of these immigrants. And Assam Rifles will upload all the forms which they have received from the people on the Indo-Myanmar border portal and record biometrics of the people as well. And apart from that, it also issues a border pass with a photograph on it for the applicant and a QR code as well. And in fact, the pass has to be deposited within the same check post while they are actually returning from India, or they are returning from Myanmar at the same check post or same crossing point before completion of the 7 days. And in the meantime, police verification, police checkups will also be done. So this is essentially to prevent illegal migrants or illegal immigration, particularly the Rohingya Muslim communities, right? So I hope you have understood this. And the next topic is with respect to an article in the Hindu about the disaster management bill and its potential lapses. We'll try to understand this. What is this disaster management bill and what are the lapses that the author has been pointed out in this article, right? So you can also go through these details. The context is that the disaster management bill, amendment bill 2024, and in fact it has actually resulted in some concerns, right? Some concerns with respect to impact on the participatory governance and accountability. Now when we talk about the disaster management, community participation is very, very important because locals are being considered as the first responders in any disaster like event. So because of that particular reason, this particular bill has raised certain concerns with respect to participatory governance and accountability. And the critics of this disaster management amendment bill 2024 have been arguing that bill fails to address key gaps in the disaster management act 2005. So there are certain critical gaps which are which are in the Disaster Management Amendment Bill 2024. So government actually failed to address those key gaps, and in fact government has also been planning to weaken the provisions in the Disaster Management Act through this amendment bill. So those provisions are actually meant to ensure a holistic, inclusive and also efficient disaster management as well. So this is what the author has been saying, and now we'll try to understand the lapses in the Disaster Management Amendment Bill and its certain provisions. So first and foremost, this Disaster Management Amendment Bill uses certain terms like monitor and also guidelines, right? So it actually uses certain terms such as monitor and guidelines, and these terms may undermine the local community's role as a first responders. Remember, as I've already told you, that the local communities are the first responders in case of any natural disaster or any other disaster, whether it is a man-made disaster, natural disaster, a chemical disaster, an industrial disaster. So local people are actually the first responders. But the terms which are being used as monitor and guidelines actually undermining the participation of local communities in the relief and rescue efforts. So in fact, local participation has been emphasized in global frameworks as well, such as Sendai Framework Convention on Disaster Risk Reduction and Hugo Framework Convention on Disaster Risk Reduction. Now, in this context, the author has been suggesting that there is a need to include a collaborative approach using terms like supervision, and that would have fostered a greater trust with the local entities. Now we need to involve multiple stakeholders, and that's where we could actually ensure effective participation of the local communities or different stakeholders in disaster relief, rescue, mitigation efforts. And apart from that, the bill also defines concepts like hazard and resilience as well. However, this bill particularly ignores the critical role which is being played by the local communities, the panchayats and non-governmental organizations in disaster management. Now, in fact, local communities, panchayats, NGOs actually play invaluable role in disaster like events. So therefore it is very important that we need to recognize their role, and in fact it is being evident like certain incidents or certain disasters like cyclone Aila and even 2013 Kedarnath floods, where we have a multi-stakeholder participation, the local communities, people from the panchayats, non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations and the local community. So they have responded enormously, and they also reduced the intensity and the scale of such disasters. So therefore it is very important that we must recognize their role. However, this new bill has neglected the role of these multiple stakeholders, and even the bill also neglects to address the intersectional vulnerabilities, and it also fails to recognize the compounded discrimination which is being faced by now. When you look into the impact of disaster, right, so not every section of people will face the same impact, right? So rich would have a different impact, poor would have poor are actually being more vulnerable, and among the poor, senior citizens, children, women, disabled, so they are more vulnerable, right? So therefore it is very important that we need to identify and recognize the intersectional vulnerabilities of the disaster management, right? So it actually failed to recognize the compounded discrimination that is being faced by some vulnerable sections such as women, disabled individuals and even marginalized communities during the disasters. So thus it has been limiting the inclusivity aspect of the bill. So bill is not inclusive, bill is actually not a holistic aspect. And in fact, bill also overlooks death of animals in the disasters, right? So in fact, disasters are not specifically for the people. In fact, disasters would also result in devastation of the animal populations as well. So this bill overlooks the death of animals in disasters, thereby neglecting the responsibilities of disaster management authorities in implementing rules called animal birth control rules, or they are also known as ABC rules of 2023 and also addressing the worst impact of disasters on the wildlife conservation and wildlife populations as well. And apart from that, there are certain gaps in regional and urban disaster management as well that this bill actually failed to address, right? For example, when we talk about this particular disaster management amendment bill of 2024, it has actually failed to have a collaborative approach with the countries in the South Asia, because we already have the mechanisms such as groupings such as SAARC, BIMSTEC and BRICS groupings. However, this bill fails to maintain regional collaboration frameworks. So regional collaboration is very, very important, right? So for example, whenever there is a cyclone in the Bay of Bengal, that impacts Myanmar, that impacts Bangladesh, and that could also impact India. So therefore a collaborative approach is very, very important, and that could also further increases India's influence and soft power in those respective countries. And therefore India could also share best practices with those respective countries, because India has been almost taking lead in countries groupings like BIMSTEC and SAARC. Now in this context, the bill fails to mention regional collaboration frameworks such as SAARC, BIMSTEC and BRICS. So thereby India has been missing the opportunity to strengthen cross-border disaster response strategies in South Asia. And in fact, these cross-border disaster response strategies are very, very important from the India's point of view, right? So because India wanted to have a dominant position, India wanted to maintain its influence in the South Asia region. So since the entire South Asia is facing same level of vulnerability, right? So keeping this in mind, so India should actually consider this aspect of the cross-border collaboration in disaster response as well, right? So apart from that, the bill does not encourage the international collaboration or even the decentralization of the responsibilities within the National Disaster Management Authority. And apart from that, a regional approach that was outlined in 2011 SAARC agreement, right? In SAARC agreement of 2011, a regional approach has been outlined on rapid response could have further improved the disaster resilience across the neighboring countries as well. Now in this context, I hope all of you knew about the zoonotic diseases as well as epizoonotic diseases. So zoonotic diseases are the diseases which spread from the animals to human beings. COVID-19 is a zoonotic disease. Now what are these epizootic diseases? So epizootic diseases are diseases which are a key concern among the animal populations, and those are epizootic diseases, right? So these are the critical areas where the disaster management amendment bill of 2024 has actually missed, and they need to look into all these different aspects, and they should bridge the gaps immediately, right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much.